Okay, recorded. So good morning, guys.
Morning.
Morning.
Today we're going to talk about experimental research, and I made a presentation, so we can take an attention on my presentation here. Let me share the screen first. Can you guys see my screen?
Not yet. Yes, can see.
Okay.
Wow. Clear enough?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the summary that I can get from the article. So the first one is, what is experimental research? The definition. Then the second one is steps to do. How to make an experimental research. The third is the example. And the fourth is the summary for this experimental research. So what is it about? Ribka, would you want to read the definition? Or what is it about?
All right. Experimental research design enables researchers to control or change the situation that leads to different outcomes. In other words, this design involves the control or manipulation of the condition to discover relationships between variables. A variable is anything that may change or may be changed from one condition to another. Independent variable means controlled by the researchers. Dependent variable applied to another condition. Example, the researchers implement teacher-centered learning to how it affects.
Okay, thank you, Ribka.
You're welcome.
So, experimental research is kind of research design that the benefit of this experimental research, maybe we can add two or more variables, independent, dependent, or maybe you can add two independent or two dependent variables. And I give you an example here. The researchers implements teacher-centered learning to how it affects students' understanding. So teacher-centered learning is the independent variable, and the students' understanding become the dependent variable. Is everything clear here?
Yes.
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 Okay, next. There are two basic types of experimental research. The first one is through experiments, and the second one is quasi-experiments. So the first one, assignment to treatment in through experiments, is the researchers randomly assign subjects to control and treatment groups. But in quasi-experiments, is it non-random method used to assign subject to groups. And then for the control over treatment, in through experiments, the researchers usually design the treatment and decides which subject receive it. But in quasi-experiment, the researchers often doesn't have control over the treatment, but instead studies pre-existing groups that receive different treatments after the fact. And then for the use of control groups, in through experiments requires the use of control and treatment groups, but in quasi-experiments, control groups are not required, although they are commonly used. So in the article, we are focusing on the first experiment, the true experiments. So I will talk more deeply about the true experiments. And then the true experiments has three criteria. The first one is control group and experimental group. So this control group that they can randomly choose the treatment. Like a control group is a group of participants in the research that do not receive the treatment or action. On the other hand, the experimental group is the participants who receive the treatment. And then the second criteria is manipulated variable. The researchers can manipulate the variable, like in the outcome, the dependent variable, they can manipulate it. Then the third criteria is random assignment. Population should have equal chance to be included in any group. Next, doing experimental research. So this is the steps to do. The first one, deciding the topic. So you choose the topic, the problem that you want to explore, to research. And then you can read literature to improve your understanding about your topic. After you find the topic, you can developing hypotheses and variables. The hypothesis is the tentative conclusion, or I think it's like guessing the result, like the example I gave to you, the implementing teacher center learning, teaching center learning is affect to student understanding. So the hypothesis is teaching center learning can affect student understanding. That's the example of hypothesis. Next. Okay, so the third is selecting the samples and the instrument. So you may select the representative sample, give reliable conclusion, and then the instrument should be designed carefully to measure each variable. Then the fourth is measuring the results. Researchers need to make a test, the independent variable, to know the significance, the difference between the regular and the implementing the treatment class. And then there are three types of measuring the result. The first one is test for independent groups. So researchers has two objects, but only implement the variable on one. So we have two class, but we just implementing the treatment on one class, like Miss Julie said before in the example. And then the second one is t-test for dependent groups. Researchers gave pre-test and post-test on one object only. And the third test is one-way analysis of variance or ANOVA. Researchers comparing two independent variables and one dependent. So the example is teaching center learning affect student understanding. The first independent is teaching center learning. And then I make the second independent, student center learning can affect students' understanding. So we have two independent here, teaching center learning and student center learning. that can affect. Then after we have the test, we compare both of these variables. The effect, so the example comes from the example's title is the effect of teaching reading strategies on EFL, learners reading anxiety. Mr. Rico, would you mind to help me read this text?
Okay, from the effect, right?
From the research
Title.
question.
Oh, okay. The research question of the study. The present study was conducted to explore the effects of teaching reading strategies on English as a foreign language learners' reading anxiety. Subsequently, the foreign language reading anxiety scale was administered between the two groups to make sure that both groups were homogeneous in terms of their reading anxiety at the outset.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rico. So the concern here is to explore the effect of teaching reading strategies on English as a foreign language learners' reading anxiety. So that is the problem. The researchers want to explore more about the effect of teaching reading strategies. Next, hypothesis on the study. Teaching reading strategies has significant effect on EFL learners' reading anxiety. So this is what the researchers' hypothesis. Teaching reading strategies has significant effect on EFL learners. Can you guys differ the independent and dependent variable?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So, independent variables is the variable that treat or that treat the dependent variable, and the dependent variable is the cost one. The effect
Okay.
the effect of the treatment.
Okay. So from this hypothesis, where is the independent variable?
The independent is the teaching reading strategies. Is it
Okay,
right?
good. Yes, that is the independent variable. And then for the dependent one, what
The
is the dependent
dependent
variable?
is the EFL learners reading anxiety.
Yes, that's right. So I think the dependent is the object for the treatment. I think it makes you easier to understand about these variables. And then how many respondents were involved in this study? So the researchers used 55 intermediate EFL learners among a total numbers of 90. They are randomly selected in the experimental group, 28 students, and in the control group, 27 students. And then Ms. Nelchi, would you mind to read how were the study designed?
Okay, Alpha. How were the study designed? This study involved 55 intermediate EFL learners. The researchers selected the sample from preliminary English test or PET. The respondents were randomly assigned to experimental and control group.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Nelchi.
You're welcome.
So we have 1, 2, 3, six example here from the problems until the only 4 from the problems, hypothesis, and then the respondent, and how the respondent choose. And then I'm not give you the table because I think our concern is just on the theories. And for the tables, I think we would continue on the statistic class. So let's go to the summary. So this experimental research controls the procedure by giving manipulated actions in certain conditions, which is called the independent variable, to investigate the effect on another factor or dependent variable. There are 2 basic types of experimental research: through experiments and quasi-experiments. After deciding the topic and finding the purpose of the study, the researcher formulates the hypothesis. The hypothesis is the tentative conclusion on how the treatment affects the outcomes. The hypothesis and the variables know the significance of the hypothesis and the variables. The researchers need to select the representative sample to give a reliable conclusion. To know the significance of the values, the research needs to do statistical tests, those 3 tests. I think we may choose one of them. Some examples are testing significance difference, t-test for independent group, testing significance difference, t-test for dependent group, and testing significance difference one-way analysis of variance. So that's all from the leader. Maybe anybody wants to ask about the materials, or should we continue the lesson?
We can continue to the inspector.
Continue. Okay, let me stop sharing. Then, okay, anybody wants to share about the journal or me? Okay, maybe.
Yeah, maybe you, Alfa.
Okay. Okay. So the inspector, Miss Nelchi, time is
Okay,
yours.
okay, Alpha. Can you zoom the lagi? Okay.
Is it big enough?
Okay, enough.
Okay.
So now I'm as the inspector. So the first question is, what key issues are presented in the text and why are they essential? So I found three key issues in the article. The first one is, what is the definition of experimental research? The next one is, what types of variable in experimental research? And the last is, how to do the experimental research? And why are they essential? So for me, I think that they are essential because we need the experimental research in our daily life to do our research, especially the scientific, right? When they want to make their research in a laboratory. So for the example, first one example is the teachers might use the experimental research to determine if a new method of teaching or a new curriculum is better than older system. And next, the other example is when we want to make our thesis, so we need the experimental research to find out the cause and effect relationship between two or more variables of our research. And next, the second question is, could you scroll with us, Alpha? Okay. How do the examples in the text help explain the issues? So, the examples in the text help explain the issues with explaining clearly about the example. So as we can see in the article that the writers explaining how to make experimental research with the topic flipped learning model are not effective in fostering learners an autonomy with step-by-step start from deciding the topic and developing hypotheses and variables, and after that selecting the sample and the instrument, and then measuring the result, and so on. So I think that the writers explain clearly example in the article, so this is very helpful to readers when they read this article. So when they read the article, they um, langsung understand the example like that. And next, the third question is make the critical questions to be discussed in the group. So the first question is, uh, before that, I want to tell that I'm sorry if my question is a silly question, but I hope that we can discuss this question together. So the first question is, when should the experimental be used? I mean experimental research. Experimental research be used. How do you think, guys?
I think it's up to you, up to the thesis writer, because experimental research is kind of research design. And before this experimental research, we have correlational research, if I'm not mistaken. So we can choose one of those two kind of research design. It's up to the thesis writer.
Okay, thank you, Alpha. How about you, Rico? Mr. Rico.
I think for me, when should I use experimental research? I think I use it when I want to know the relation between two variables, and then is it the, the variables have a cause and effect. So I use experimental, and then because experimental is like test research two means, and then like control group, we make a research of two groups, and then want to know the variable, is it have relation or not. I think, yeah, that's such situation, I think.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rico. How about you, Miss Ribka? What do you think?
I think we have to use experimental research, like what Rico said before, when we want to know the relationship between two variables, and then I think we have to use experimental research if we want to reject it if we want to reject a null hypothesis, means that an accepted hypothesis, but we want to reject it. So, for example, hypothesis, there is a hypothesis that teacher-centered learning is forcing the students, is not forcing the students, learners autonomy, but we want to reject it. So we use experimental research, and it makes another outcome. So the outcome is like apa tadi? Teacher learning centered, force students autonomy.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Ribka. Now, the second question is, do you think that experimental research is useful for us as the students? Yes or no, and give the reason. Maybe Mr. Rico?
Okay, I think it is useful for us as a student because in experimental research, we use experimental research to gain information with another condition, because sometimes our variable might be changed. So it is very useful for use experimental research to strengthen our hypothesis, or maybe rejected a hypothesis.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rico, for your opinion, for your answer. And next is Ms. Ribka.
Okay, I think yes, it is useful, very useful for students to know experimental research, because students need to conduct a research, and then it's based on the students' ability to use another research method. And if the students able to use experimental research, so it will be good if they use experimental research, because it will help students to know the relationship between variables. I think that's the reason.
Okay, Ms. Ribka, thank you for answering the question. Now, how about you, Mr. Alfa?
I agree with both of them. And for the reason, I think it's already explained by them, by Rico and Ribka. But how about your opinion? Your answer about this question?
For me, I think that experimental research is useful for us as a students, because as I said before, this is very important when we want to do our research, like uh, to make our thesis. So we need to use this experimental research to make sure that the variable that we use is uh, berhubungan antara satu sama lain, like that. Okay. Now the last question is, what makes the experimental research is conscientious? It means that apa yang menyebabkan experimental research itu menjadi hal yang teliti? Mengapa experimental research merupakan salah satu maksudnya mengapa apa yang membuat experimental research ini teliti, maksudnya apa ya? Kenapa experimental research ini teliti? Ketika kita mau menentukan sebuah variabel. Do you get it, guys? What I mean?
I think we can leave it away. Maybe we can discuss it later because I think the time is limited.
Yeah.
Maybe we can move to Ribka.
Okay. Now we will move to Ribka.
Okay, Ribka, time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Nelty. So I'm a word wizard, and the first question is, what 5 definitions of terms do you find from the text? So I find hypothesis, and then treatment, and then null hypothesis, and tentative conclusion. Can you scroll it down? And the last is instrument. So the definition of those words in the text are: first is for hypothesis. The definition is the assumed relationship between the variables. My own definition is a hypothesis is an accepted correlation between the variables but has not yet been proved. And then
Maybe you just can jump to your own definition to make it quick.
okay.
Thank you.
All right. So the next is treatment. Treatment is a change that can be made by the independent variable, depends on the situation. Then there is null hypothesis. As I have said before, null hypothesis is a hypothesis that should be discussed and rejected by the researchers. So it's the opposite of alternate hypothesis. Next, can you scroll it down? Next is instrument. Instrument is a tool used to collect, measure, and analyze the data of the research, or it is used by researchers to measure their data for the research topic. Next is tentative conclusion. Tentative conclusion is an answer to a specific question raised at the beginning of the investigation, or a pre-conclusion. Next. What is this? Okay. How are they used in other contexts? For hypothesis, hypothesis is an idea or explanation of something that is based on a few known facts but has not yet been proved. And then treatment. Treatment in another context is something that is used to cure an illness or injury, and or to make somebody look and feel good. So treatment usually used in like healthy settings like that. And then null hypothesis. Null hypothesis is the idea that an experiment that is done using 2 groups of people will show the same results for each group. And then tentative conclusion is an educated guess about the answer, about the specific question, the answer of the specific question. Next, instrument. Instrument in another context is an object used for producing sounds. Next. All right, done. Thank you.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you, Ms. Ribka.
Very good. Yeah. But one thing, yeah, perhaps instruments, yeah, it has a different opinion. Yeah? It has a different meaning, I think. Well, you said a thing that can produce sounds, but instrument in this case is the tool that we use to get our data, like survey, interview questions, and so on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So class, I think the time is up, but we still have 1 minute. Yeah. Well, I guess that you still have a lot to share. Yeah, actually. Is that okay? Well, you can submit it later in LMS, yeah. Yes, Rico, do you want to say something before um, I close all rooms, all breakout rooms?
We just a brief vaccination from a connector, Miss.
Okay, good, good. Yeah, you still have 1 minute actually.
Okay, so I found two sources. Can you scroll it down, Alpha? So I found two sources. These articles discuss about differences between a control group and experimental group, and then is relevant to the text. And then also the second article is about difference between t-test and ANOVA. Yeah, so you can read this article through these links. And then I use video from YouTube. So this video discuss about experimental research such as a design and then control and experimental, as well explanation about dependent and independent variables. So why I use videos, because it is it is easier for us to understand with illustrate from because from the text it is kind of difficult. So from the video there is illustrate, so it can be useful for us to understand the text better. Okay, that's all maybe.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rico. Yeah, thank you for sharing the links. I think they would be very useful. Yeah, and I couldn't wait to read your answers, the journals from your group, guys. Okay, so thank you very much. Yeah, see you in the main room.
Okay, Miss. Thank you.
Bye.